In the summer of a mysterious disappearance in California, a 19-year-old student found himself at the center of one of the most perplexing, unsolved cases in the region. His life had seemed ordinary in the days leading up to his vanishing. Friends, classmates, and relatives described him as a young man with promise, balancing the challenges of school, work, and the transitions of early adulthood. Nothing about his routine suggested he was in danger or that he was planning to disappear. But what began as an ordinary day took a turn when his car was found wrecked near Castaic Lake in northern Los Angeles County, setting off a chain of questions that have persisted ever since. Despite exhaustive searches by law enforcement, volunteer rescue teams, and family members who refused to give up, no body was ever recovered, and his fate remains an unresolved mystery. The story begins with the discovery of his vehicle. The car was found wrecked along the roads near the Castaic Lake area, a location both isolated and treacherous in some parts, with steep embankments, rugged terrain, and water that runs deep enough to conceal nearly anything beneath the surface. First responders and deputies arriving at the scene of the crash examined the vehicle closely. There was damage consistent with an accident, but what alarmed investigators was the absence of the driver. No signs of his body were inside the car. No blood patterns immediately pointed to catastrophic injury, and no nearby footprints gave a clear indication of where he might have gone. The vehicle appeared abandoned after the crash, and the fact that no one had seen him since that moment set the foundation for endless speculation. From the outset, investigators considered the most straightforward possibility: that the young man had been injured in the crash and wandered away in disoriented condition. Accidents of this kind often leave drivers concussed, confused, or suffering from shock, and the terrain surrounding Castaic Lake is challenging enough that someone could vanish if they stumbled away without direction. Search teams deployed almost immediately, combing the area with canines, helicopters, and boats. Divers plunged into the lake itself, convinced that if he had tried to seek water or fallen into it by accident, his remains would eventually be found. Yet day after day turned up nothing. Not a single item of clothing, not a shoe, not a wallet, not a phone, and not even a trace of his physical presence. It was as if he had simply dissolved into the landscape. The absence of evidence only expanded the scope of possibilities. One line of thought suggested foul play. A car crash could have been staged or could have served as a diversion, masking a crime that had taken place elsewhere. If someone had reason to harm the young man, abandoning the wrecked car near a remote lake would divert attention away from more deliberate motives. Detectives questioned friends, classmates, and relatives, hoping to uncover any tensions, arguments, debts, or troubling relationships that might provide motive. But the accounts they gathered painted him as neither troubled nor entangled in anything that would ordinarily lead to violent conflict. There were no known enemies, no involvement in gangs, and no major disputes that would justify someone orchestrating his disappearance. Another explanation entertained was voluntary disappearance. At 19, the pressures of adulthood can weigh heavily, and sometimes young men choose to walk away from their lives, leaving behind their past in search of escape or reinvention. The car crash, in this interpretation, could have been deliberate, a dramatic severing of ties intended to throw people off his trail. But this hypothesis clashed with the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. Normally, when someone fakes a disappearance, they leave traces of planning, unusual financial activity, strange messages, or hints of dissatisfaction with their current life. His digital footprint revealed no such indications. His bank accounts were untouched, his phone records did not suggest secret arrangements, and his family saw no signs that he was preparing to run away. Moreover, the difficulty of surviving indefinitely off the grid, especially for someone so young, makes this theory harder to accept without further supporting facts. Investigators also considered the possibility of a random accident unconnected to the wrecked car itself. For instance, he may have attempted to seek help after the crash and wandered into the rugged hills, succumbing to exposure, dehydration, or a fall into one of the many ravines in the area. The landscape around Castaic Lake is unforgiving, with dense brush, rattlesnakes, steep inclines, and sudden drops. Many volunteers scoured the terrain with this in mind, yet despite repeated efforts over weeks and even months, not a shred of evidence came to light. Forensic dogs trained to detect human scent failed to locate him. The failure to uncover even a fragment of clothing raised doubts about this explanation, since it is exceedingly rare for someone to vanish completely in such a limited geographical area without eventual discovery. The role of the lake itself loomed large in the case. Castaic Lake has claimed lives before, both through drowning accidents and other tragic circumstances. If he had entered the water after the crash, whether intentionally or in confusion, the lake could have concealed him. But search divers returned again and again without success, and sonar equipment, though limited in scope, yielded no promising targets. Over time, the possibility of the lake concealing his body grew less plausible. Water typically yields its secrets sooner or later, but this case produced nothing. That deepened the mystery and returned attention to other, more sinister explanations. The family of the young man remained steadfast in their hope for answers. They organized vigils, distributed flyers, and worked with media outlets to keep his story alive. Each anniversary of his disappearance brought renewed pleas for information, and tips occasionally trickled in. Some claimed sightings of him in other cities. Others suggested he may have been taken against his will. Law enforcement treated each lead seriously, but none bore fruit. Without concrete evidence, the case sat at an uneasy intersection between missing person investigation and cold case mystery. Detectives remained open to any possibilities, but the absence of tangible evidence left them with little to move forward. As the years passed, the case gained a reputation as one of the region's haunting unsolved mysteries. Castaic Lake itself became symbolic in the narrative, a place where answers seemed close yet perpetually out of reach. Many speculated about the psychological toll the case had on his family. To lose a child is devastating, but to lose a child without closure leaves wounds that never heal. The family lived in a suspended state, unable to mourn properly and unable to embrace hope fully. The community at large also shared in the unease, as young students and parents alike recognized how abruptly an ordinary life can be consumed by uncertainty. In analyzing the case, one cannot overlook the role of geography and timing. The car's discovery near the lake placed investigators in a narrow frame of reference, which might have inadvertently limited their thinking. If the crash was incidental and his disappearance unrelated to the immediate area, then searches concentrated around the lake may have missed other crucial locations. Additionally, the passage of time has a corrosive effect on memory and evidence. Whatever clues may have existed in the immediate aftermath of the crash were soon eroded by weather, human activity, and the simple fading of details. Witnesses who may have noticed something unusual that day either failed to come forward or could not later recall specifics. The psychological dimensions of the case also warrant consideration. Forensic psychologists analyzing disappearances often distinguish between voluntary, involuntary, and accidental vanishings. The voluntary model suggests he chose to disappear. The involuntary model points to abduction or foul play. The accidental model involves natural misfortune following the crash. Each framework fits certain elements of this case but fails to fully explain the absence of evidence. The voluntary model is weakened by the lack of preparation. The involuntary model struggles against the absence of witnesses or forensic traces. The accidental model cannot account for the complete absence of a body or belongings after exhaustive search. The persistence of mystery stems from the equal plausibility and equal inadequacy of all three interpretations. Public fascination with the case endures because it encapsulates the core elements of an unresolved narrative: youth cut short, mystery at a symbolic location, and a trail of evidence that raises more questions than answers. It highlights the fragility of certainty in human life and the limits of modern search and forensic techniques. Even with technology, trained dogs, sonar, helicopters, and teams of experts, sometimes the truth remains hidden. That fact unsettles people because it suggests that the unknown can still resist even the most determined human effort. Speculation over the years has also introduced more unconventional theories. Some suggest he may have fallen victim to opportunistic crime after the crash, perhaps being picked up by someone with malicious intent. Others point to the possibility of mental health crisis leading him to actions that were out of character and difficult to trace. Still others invoke less rational theories, ranging from cult involvement to paranormal explanations. While these ideas gain traction in online communities fascinated with mystery, they tend to collapse under scrutiny when compared with the absence of concrete supporting facts. Ultimately, the case of the 19-year-old student who vanished after his car was found wrecked near Castaic Lake remains a void filled with unanswered questions. What makes it so enduring is not only the tragedy of a young life interrupted, but also the way it challenges assumptions about investigation and closure. People expect that every mystery can be solved with enough persistence, yet this case resists resolution, standing as a reminder of the limits of human knowledge and the persistence of uncertainty. Families who live through such mysteries often describe the experience as worse than death itself, because grief cannot properly begin while hope still lingers, and hope cannot be nurtured without evidence of survival. The search for answers continues, if only symbolically. The case is still remembered, still whispered about in the context of California disappearances, and still serves as a cautionary tale for those who travel near isolated landscapes at night. The absence of resolution has turned it into a story rather than a solved crime. And in many ways, stories carry more weight than mere facts because they force people to confront their own vulnerabilities. The family, the investigators, and the community at large remain connected by the invisible thread of this disappearance, bound together by the desire for truth and the pain of its elusiveness. Until evidence emerges, the fate of that young man will remain suspended between accident, intention, and foul play, a haunting reminder of how easily someone can slip into the realm of the missing and how rarely full closure is guaranteed. That is why this disappearance still resonates today. It embodies the painful intersection of hope and despair, certainty and ambiguity, and the relentless passage of time that only deepens the mystery. The wrecked car near Castaic Lake stands as the last known trace of a young life, a silent marker of a moment when everything changed, and beyond it lies only questions without answers. The detailed search efforts, the family's grief, the investigators' frustration, and the community's ongoing speculation all converge into a single unresolved narrative. The case illustrates how fragile the line is between presence and absence, how quickly the ordinary can turn into the inexplicable, and how deeply such mysteries can burrow into collective memory. The young man who vanished remains both absent and ever-present, his story told and retold as a reminder that not every disappearance ends with discovery, and some lives remain suspended in the shadows of the unknown.